Hello, everyone. You are listening to the C Squared podcast with Corey, Curtis, and Holly. We may want to start changing our name because we have so many co-hosts now. Holly is back again with us. We're thrilled to have her, but we are also thrilled to have Miss Eleanor Goodman from Metal Hammer. She's got a wealth of experience working in print media, and she is here to drop some knowledge bombs on y'all like what we always do. So first, I want to say thank you for joining us today. We are so thrilled to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's gonna be exciting, y'all. This is a one to pay attention to. If you don't pay attention to any others, which you should pay attention to all the podcasts. Yeah. But for people who may not be familiar with you or your work or what you do with Metal Hammer, do you want to just give like a nutshell, like brief intro of who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. I'm deputy editor at Metal Hammer. We obviously have the print magazine, and I look after the main section of that, which is all the features. And we also have a presence online. We have the Metal Hammer website too, and I co-host the Metal Hammer podcast.
Oh, so you're just, well, not just like us, because you probably have a bigger podcast than we do. I'm sure Curtis has a follow-up to that. He has this very specific face that he gets. I call it follow-up face, where he gets this look that, yeah, he has a follow-up.
Well, because you do a little bit more than that. Like you're also at, you want to go a little bit more in depth on kind of your roles, because you also do classic rock, or at least you used to do classic rock and that type of thing, right?
So I occasionally freelance for Classic Rock and Prog magazine. So they're our sister magazines. So Metal Hammer is owned by a company called Future, and we have Metal Hammer, Classic Rock and Prog, which are our listening titles, which means they're for people who listen to rock and metal music. And then we have a section of magazines and websites for the playing titles, like Total Guitar and Bass magazine, and they're for people as they sound who like playing musical instruments as well as listening to music. So yeah, I think there's about 30 magazines and website in our division in Future, the music division. And the cool thing about that is that we can share a lot of information, music knowledge across all the different titles. And it's just a great environment to be in, because it's like a big community of professionals who are all into music, all kind of talking about it and getting involved.
So my final follow-up before I shoot it over to Holly is, like, how do you kind of like juggle all those things? Because there's a lot of stuff that you write for and you do. So is it as crazy as it seems for like a schedule, or what?
I think magazines nowadays are really crazy because we have smaller teams now than we had 20 years ago, because just the way the print industry has evolved. So it can get pretty crazy. But yeah, it's just nice to have kind of these different titles, because you see that there's an album coming out, and sometimes it's an album that crosses over all the brands. So we've just had Gojira on the cover, and I'm going to do a little bit on Gojira for Classic Rock, and Prog have kind of done their own thing on Gojira. So it's kind of cool when you get that kind of split. Sometimes you get bands that just go across all the brands, and it can be pretty crazy. I'm not going to lie. I think probably the craziest thing is just the volume of music that we get sent. It's just more than you ever possibly listen to in a lifetime. But that's great. A lot of people are creating, and that's what we want to hear.
Totally. Holly, I'll shoot it over to you for your question.
Yeah, thanks. So obviously in your position, you must get asked all the time, by bands, how do I get in Metal Hammer? How do we get featured and things like that? So I'm interested to know from your perspective, what is the correct way for bands to go about pitching to you?
Yeah, well, obviously some bands we hear about independently, and some bands we hear about through PRs. So if it's through a PR, usually it's probably somebody that we know, and they'll ring us up or email us and say, hey, this is a cool band, I think you'll really be interested in them, here's the promo, here's the information. And that kind of sometimes helps us sort of pick through the amount of music that we have. And we know that certain PRs deal with certain types of bands, so that means if a certain person rings us up, we'll kind of understand what genre they're pitching to us and what that's all about. And then sometimes it's bands who'll pitch to us directly, and in that case we're looking for a similar kind of thing. We're looking for short summary of who the band are, why our readers would be interested, links to all the music, links to high-res images that we would use if we did something on them, and kind of everything that you would want to know about that band, but in a very concise way. Because people just don't really have time to read lots and lots and lots of information. And I think if a journalist comes back to a band or a PR and wants to know more, that's kind of when you can unload extra information. But in the beginning, we just want to know why we should care about the band, what they sound like, and some links to music/videos.
I wanted to ask a follow-up though.
Sure.
How little information is too little information in your opinion? Because a lot of bands will even, like, I mean, they'll send the PR when they're pitching just to work with the PR, a YouTube link and nothing else, basically. I mean, obviously little, but how, like, can you explain how concise they should be?
Yeah, I mean, there's no exact science, but obviously that is too little, because if it was just a YouTube link, unless it was to the most amazing video in the world, like the best video or the craziest video, maybe then you'd be intrigued. But other than that, yeah, you're just looking for some information. It doesn't need to be like a full bio, but just what makes this band special, why you should listen to it, and just some kind of explanation, because it's really that kind of why that we're looking for. We want to be able to tell a story about that band.
So basically a link to music with genre type of thing, release date, and that's basically you're good.
Yeah, I think, well, it's good to have a little bit more sometimes. The things that you mentioned, but names of the band members are useful. If you do decide to do something on the band, you don't want to be looking through to try and find out basics like names and titles and things. So yeah, just basic biographical information and basic links and videos, but nothing too crazy unless it's like insane and unique, and yeah, maybe a crazy video or something. Sometimes we do just get sent something from a PR and they'll say, what do you think of this? And they'll just attach a video. We had one recently and I can't remember the band name, but the video is insane. We were like, what is this? That definitely made us take notice, although not remember.
Good, what is this, or bad, what is this? Because there's two different kinds of what is this.
Yeah,
it was a bit of both. We were like, is this good or is this terrible? It's probably best.
I love those kind of bands where it's like, I'm not sure what's going on, but I'm happy to be here kind of a situation. Yeah, I love those kind of bands.
It was one of those for sure. Yeah.
Did they cover?
I think it's just gone on the back burner. I think the reason a PR sent it to us was because they were wondering if they should take it on or not, and we were just kind of like, what is this? But I can't remember the name, and it's probably for the best, because that still might be happening. I don't know. Maybe that band are being taken on by someone specific. We'll see.
Okay, well, if Metal Hammer starts posting some weird videos, we'll know which band she's talking about.
Exactly that.
Holly, were you done with your questions on it, or did you have a follow-up?
I guess I'd just be interested to know if there is something, I don't know, extra special that you're looking for when you're considering a band. Like, are you perhaps looking for someone who's taken a spin, maybe genre-wise, that hasn't really been done before, or maybe if they've got a story behind them or something like that?
Yeah, it can be anything, and I think it just depends on that band's personality. There will always be something interesting to say about every band, but sometimes it's not very clear. And if somebody's pitching to us and they don't put the story front and center, it can be hard to find that out. If you just get a picture of four blokes and a bio that says they're a rock and metal band from X place and here's a song, it's just not going to give us any information to work with. But if it's kind of all that, and it says they've written a concept album about a spaceship, or they're all from different countries, or it could be anything. It really just depends on what that band's personality is. But definitely there needs to be something unique and different, because we've all heard bands where we just think they sound identical to other bands. There's a ton of metalcore bands that sound identical, and when you kind of start going into those genre specific sounds, sometimes there's just lots of bands of the same genre that are hard to tell apart, so bands need something to stand out.
I want to follow that one up as a question, because I'm curious then. So do you kind of have to play that against what people want to read about? Because there's a lot of bands that people want to read about that just sound so fucking generic, in my opinion. Do you know what I memean? What's your thought?
It's hard without being specific, actually.
Names in case someone gets mad at me.
I mean, yeah, we won't write about something if we don't think there's a story there, but that goes for established bands as well as new bands. Often we will have covered a band before and they'll have a new album out, but they'll have already had 10 other albums out. And if there's nothing more to say on it, we won't run a feature, but we do have a really big review section and we review basically everything that comes out. So we will often cover those kinds of bands in reviews and talk about how the music sounds and what they're doing with it, but maybe they won't have a full feature because there's just not kind of an interesting story to tell that hasn't been told before.
Well, that makes sense. So you save that for the reviews, but any features you want something that's unique and different. Okay, that actually makes sense.
Yeah,
Cool.
I mean, yeah, like I said, we have such a massive review section. It covers all genres, all types of bands, and that's where we kind of really get stuck into things. And then if there's a bigger story to tell, that's when we tell that in features.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Does anybody have a follow-up before Corey does hers?
No, actually, this kind of segues really well into mine anyway. So we know what bands should be doing, but I know if your inbox is anything like mine, you probably get like some really cringy pitches and things that are just like, why did you email this to somebody? So what are your biggest like pet peeves for when people are pitching you for a feature or a review or something like that?
Yeah, I think it's just not saying why it's good. Like I think it sounds really obvious, but some press releases are really badly written. And sometimes it's not even the PR's fault, it's come from the label. Maybe that label's in a different country. Maybe it's written by someone completely random that they've hired. Or maybe it's from a band who don't quite know what they're doing, which is understandable because unless you work in the music industry, why would you? And obviously that's why people reach out to PRs. So I think just having something that's really badly written, there'll be so many press releases that just don't say anything. They'll just have loads of adjectives in them, loads of hyperbole, and you just read it and you're like, well, I've read a page now and I still don't know any more than when I opened this email. There's just some really badly written press releases out there. Like I said, I'm not naming names or pointing fingers. It just happens sometimes.
We all know the people.
I definitely get the same kind of like, okay, but what do you want from me kind of press releases where they'll go into all of these, like you said, the adjectives and the hyperbole, but at the end of it, it's like, okay, but when is their album coming out? Or are you pitching me to feature a video? What do you, it's like that, the GIF from The Notebook, you know, that scene, what do you want?
Yeah, it can be like that. Yeah.
What is the worst one you've gotten though? You don't have to name names or anything, but what's like the absolute worst pitch or worst types of pitch you've gotten?
I'm really trying to think of like specifics because I think really what I just mentioned about the press releases is a huge one because I've had pages of press releases before that are 3 or 4 pages. And again, some of these are big brands and you just think, wow, I've just read 4 pages of absolutely nothing.
Get it.
Yeah. Have you ever gotten one? And I've gotten these like 3 or 4 times where it's we're so-and-so, we are a, you know, thrash band from Ohio. If you want to know more, please email us back. Have you ever gotten one of those? Because I get those and I'm like, what are you doing?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think, yeah, and I just email back and just say, speak to Jonathan, he's our reviews editor. And I just think, speak to Jonathan. And
just pass the buck.
Yeah. But I mean, there's a more serious point underneath on that is that he covers all the bands. So if there's someone emailing me asking me if I can email them back for more information, they're probably not going to be big enough or have a good enough story for the features section, but they might be a band who's really interesting and just doesn't know how to market themselves. So yeah, I'll just reply and say, probably need a bit more information, go and speak to Jonathan, he's our reviews editor. Hopefully he doesn't get too many terrible emails from me passing him on to people. But he's like a really good person to just speak to as a first port of call because he reviews everything. So but yeah, mostly everything, not actually everything, because that would require 20 magazines.
I was going to say.
Eleanor, everything that gets reviewed, he
question, just well, not really a question for me, but just in general, because I know most people will be asking this question. So if a band is independent, for example, they don't have a PR, they don't have a label or anything like that, and they do want to get in touch with Hammer and they do want to get reviewed, how do I frame this? Should they be going to you, or is it just Jonathan only?
Jonathan, because he makes all the calls on reviews, so definitely to Jonathan. But it is good to be included on stuff as deputy editor as well. I don't make the calls and reviews, but sometimes Jonathan will be like, there's this amazing record, everyone has to listen to it, like it's so good. And it's easy then for me to just kind of find the record, whereas if I'm not on those mailing lists, then he has to kind of download the record and like put that on a server for us to download, like as a team. And obviously I get so many promos every day and I put them all in a folder and I go through and I do listen to those promos, but I'm not going to be able to listen to them as comprehensively as he does. And it's not just that he's listening to them, it's that he's passing them on to freelancers, because we have a ton of freelance writers on the magazine, and a freelancer might come back to him and say this record's amazing, and then he might feed that back to us. So it's kind of just good to sort of have these things in the inbox to sort of go through at our leisure and kind of listen to and see what they're all about. But in terms of reviews on pages, then yeah, it's him.
Okay, fair enough. Did anybody have a follow-up before we go on the next one?
No, I think I'm good. And the next one is Holly, right?
Holly, yep.
Yeah.
It is me again.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's to do with the print versus digital sort of, I guess it's a bit of a debate, isn't it, that's been going on for a little while now. It would be interesting to know how you're sort of experiencing it and whether it's causing, I don't know, any problems for you with the print side of the media.
It's really interesting because I've been working in magazines for a long time now, like I don't know how many years, 14 years, 15 years. And I expected at the beginning of my career that things would be switching over to digital very quickly and that I would be working in an entirely digital environment. But actually I've been working in magazines this whole time because the transition hasn't been that quick. There are still people who want to pick up magazines and read magazines, and because of the way the content models work, and the way that you make money, it's been easier during that time to make money from magazine sales and use magazine content to run online. So I've kind of ended up working magazines, which I love all this time, but I'm quite surprised that that's the case, because I just thought things would happen more quickly. But I think what we're seeing now is more of that transition starting to happen and sort of trickle down, and for print and online to become more symbiotic. So we will commission things for the magazine knowing that certain parts of those will run online, and we'll commission things for online knowing that certain parts of those might run in the magazine. So now we kind of have this content flow where it's kind of going in either direction, and we're thinking about how we're commissioning and what audience we're commissioning for. And I think revenue models have changed as well. Certainly at Future there's a big focus on e-com, and we have writers across Louder that focus on e-com as well, whereas that wasn't really a focus, certainly not a Future a few years ago, and not in other places that I've worked either. So things are changing, but I think there's still a place for print and a place for online. It's just working out where that content is best placed, what format our content is, and where it goes.
No, it's really interesting because over the past year or so, I've noticed like a few underground magazines, as in like print versions, have suddenly started appearing again. So I don't know if there's a bit of a sentimentality or something, or just musicians liking, seeing themselves printed in a magazine, because there is something quite, I don't know, quite special about that in a way.
Yeah, I think there's still a large group of people who like print. We certainly still have a subscriber base and people who buy it on the newsstand, because it's really nice to pick up something that is curated and that has different sections and that kind of guides you through it. And this is not metal at all, but I read the Billie Eilish interview in Vogue online, and then last night I went out and bought the magazine, because even though I read the interview, it was really nice to see how they'd laid it out in the magazine and the whole package, and it just looked really good on the newsstand. And then kind of once I was in the door of the magazine, I read the other content too. And I'm not particularly like a regular Vogue reader, but this one felt a bit like an event issue. And because I'd read it online, I also thought it'd be nice to buy it because, you know, I've read the content. And so I just think it's kind of in flux at the moment, and everyone's kind of like working it out how it works best now in 2021. But I think there is a little bit of nostalgia as well, like you said, you know, people are really into vinyl now. That's really massive, whereas 10 years ago, if you'd said that, probably people would have thought you were crazy.
Yeah.
Cassettes as well, black metal bands doing cassettes, and maybe CDs. We were talking about this on our podcast, like maybe CDs are going to be the next thing, who knows, even though they're awkward. But I think a few things play into it. I think that curation aspect, and potentially a bit of nostalgia, and for someone like starting a zine as well, that's quite a cool thing, because you can just do it. You don't like need a huge amount of resource. If you just want to start a zine, you could just do it, whether it's online or in print though, I guess.
I got my follow-up face on again, Holly. I'm just gonna jump in really quick. Do you guys still we haven't had any newsstands open in Canada for like a year, so I don't know if you guys are still doing this, but are you guys still doing the extras, like the cover mounts and stuff, as part of the thing to get people to buy, or no?
So it's been a bit hit and miss during the pandemic. Okay. So we stopped doing the gifts for a while because it was logistically quite difficult to get them during the pandemic, because of where they ship from. And also we did have a budget cut at the very beginning of the pandemic when we didn't know like how long it was going to last. But we've had some gifts in what we call premium issues. So twice a year we do a premium issue, which gets more prominence on the newsstand, and we raise the cover price by £1, and that comes with all the gifts. And we did one at Christmas that came with like a calendar and beer mats and posters and that kind of thing. So we kind of target which issues we do that for the extras. Certainly that's the way it's been during the pandemic, whereas before the pandemic we used to have them a little bit more often.
Is that coming back then, just as an order to, because it just as an extra thing to get people to buy, or is it just kind of like doesn't matter anymore?
I think it's still a good thing to have, but I think we just have to decide on a case-by-case basis, and look at each issue. And we have had our budget restored somewhat, but not to the extent of what it was before. We've been quite open in our readers group as well about saying things have sort of changed a little bit during the pandemic, and everyone's been quite receptive, because I think they know it's just like harder to kind of do these things in a situation where you're trying to ship things across countries and get things made. It's a bit difficult.
Yeah, totally. And then one other follow-up, well, not really follow-up, but one other question I had before we asked the final one is, why do you think that other magazines have kind of gone under, but you guys haven't? Is it because of the quality, or what do you think it is? Like Terrorizer was around for like 30 years and they've been gone for 5 years, but you guys seem to be going strong. And what do you think it is that sets you guys apart for being able to continue?
Yeah, I think it's really hard to like comment on individual magazines, just because I don't know like what their ecosystems are like. Obviously, when Metal Hammer was part of Team Rock, Team Rock went into liquidation, and then Hammer was bought by Future. So at that time I remember seeing people commenting about why it had happened, and everybody was just saying things that were completely untrue. And obviously as someone who's worked there, you're like, that's a bit weird, like why are they saying these things when they haven't got the information? So it can be quite hard. But I think some magazines such as Terrorizer were independent magazines, so I think economically it's harder to maybe sustain an independent magazine, although Rock sounds independent and they've sustained themselves. But Metal Hammer is obviously part of a division and a company, so we have the infrastructure so we can print, distribute multiple magazines, and obviously those costs are shared across the organization. So it's not like doing one magazine or 3 magazines, it's kind of hundreds of magazines instead. And I think the other reason is because we're a monthly. I think obviously Kerrang put out a statement at the beginning of the pandemic saying they were ceasing publication till further notice. I think that was much more difficult for them because they're weekly, so they're on the newsstands every week. And if people couldn't go to the shops and the shops were closed, people couldn't go and pick up the magazine. And I think they're relying quite a lot on the live sector as well. And some of the advertising went away from the live music industry because there were no gigs.
True.
So I think kind of those things sort of played into it. Whereas being in a bigger company, I think we've got a little bit more of the organizational support around us, and being a monthly, we had a little bit more resilience, because if people went into the shops once a month, that was kind of still enough to pick up Hammer or subscribe.
True. Did that actually, do you know if that increased your guys' sales when the other magazines stopped, or did it not make a difference?
I think we just increased our traffic online, because there was a period of time when no one was really going to the shops very much. So I'm not really sure if we picked up any of their readership so much as just grew our online readership.
Makes sense. And then last question is, we want to talk about social media, if you're okay with that.
Yeah, sure.
So can you kind of go over like how you personally, because I know you're not in charge of the Hammer online type stuff, how you personally are using social media in order to kind of like, promote Hammer and that type of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not massively active on social media. I know there are people in the industry that are much more active than I am. And I think just because we have so much to do, like on a day-to-day basis, it doesn't really come at the top of my priority list. But I use it on a personal level just to promote what we're doing, really. So I always tweet about the new cover, pin it to the top of my profile, tweet about like news stories that we've got going on during the day. Like obviously they all just go on the Hammer account, but if there's something that I'm personally excited about, I'll usually retweet it with a comment. Instagram, same thing really. I just kind of put up the cover. I sometimes do stories on things that I'm doing. That's a bit more personal probably than work. Facebook is pretty much just personal stuff, and I just kind of lurk on there, to be honest. I don't really post on it. I just lurk and look at other people's stuff. But yeah, obviously we've got a big social presence with Hammer. We've got, I think, like 2 million Facebook people. What's the word I'm looking for? An audience of 2 million on Facebook, and a big audience on Instagram and Twitter as well. So yeah, we've got a lot of content going out there all day, every day.
And how do you think bands should be using social media in order to get more noticed by journalists, out of curiosity?
More noticed by journalists is an interesting one.
Obviously not spam you, I know that, but I mean, like, how can they do it, without being idiots about it, I guess?
I was going to say the most annoying thing is just lots of DMs, because we've got personal email, but professional email addresses for that. So we just want people to email us at Hammer. I don't know really. I think just email us rather than using social.
Let me reframe the question for you. How do you think a band could successfully use social media in order to grow their following, so that way journalists maybe would pay more attention to them, I think is how I'm trying to frame it.
Sure. Again, I think just having a personality that is them, and just being kind of tactical about it. So making sure there's a constant stream of posts, not an annoying amount, obviously there's a line, but scheduling things for Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, so that there's regular content going up, and thinking about what to do for that content. So not just kind of tweeting something random, but actually giving people something, like, putting up an acoustic version of a song, or like just demonstrating them playing on the guitar a little bit, but again, it depends on which part of social media you're talking about, because that kind of thing works really well on Instagram, but Twitter's more about kind of the news of the day and the stories of the day. So in that case, you'd want to be sort of responding to things happening in the metal world. Certainly if you're a new band and you haven't got like a ton of things to promote just yet. So yeah, I think just looking at what your favorite bands do as well is always a really good one, because there are always people who are better on Twitter and Instagram than other people who have kind of got the knack of it, or have employed someone to help. And there's certain emerging artists you see doing really cool things, like putting up like a picture and then maybe explaining the meaning behind the song, or giving some like backstage photos to something like a performance that they've done, or like I said, kind of demonstrating something on their instruments, and that kind of stuff just is really nice on Instagram to sort of help build a profile there. So yeah, I think it just depends on the band, and it depends what part of social media they're using. but just having a presence is the most important thing. So just making sure that content's lined up.
I agree 100%. Do either of you guys have any follow-up questions before we wrap up?
I think I'm good on my end, Holly.
No, I think I'm good. Yeah.
Cool. Well, what do you want to plug, Eleanor? Do you just want to plug the magazine or an account?
Yeah.
Or
Plug the magazine for sure. Yeah, go to tinyurl.com/metalhammer. No, that's the wrong buy link. Oh, I've messed it up. tinyurl.com/buyhammer is the link, but you can just search for Metal Hammer in my favorite magazines as well. That's the website where you can buy it, and obviously just go to metalhammer.com for all your metal news and features.
cool. Well, thank you very much for doing this. We really, really appreciate it. And we're going to end off by saying, party on, Corey, party on, Holly.
Party on, everyone.
Party on.